Oh, hello there, Chuck. I didn't see you there. How are you?
Good, just editing the episode. What's up?
What's up? Oh, you commoner and your common talk. I guess I'm what you would say, doing not much.
What is this?
Chuck, psst, Chuck, it's me, your pal Brady. I'm practicing patronizing, so I'm working on being more condescending to people. Oh, do you have any idea where man can get some crumpets around here?
Why are you doing this?
You know, for our Patreon. We've been asking people to patronize our page, and I didn't want to ask them to do something I wasn't willing to do it myself, so I figured I'd get some practice in.
Oh, God. Brady, no, that's not what it means.
Oh, no?
Listen, listeners can go to our Patreon page, pick the level you want to contribute.
Oh.
Each level has special rewards.
Okay.
Like exclusive Life After minisodes.
Or not safe for work bloopers?
Or like a monthly collection of deconstruction memes.
And even personal consultations or meet up with your favorite host, Chuck and Brady?
Yeah. Brady. Patreon.com/thelifeafter.
I guess even you could find it.
I just started recording.
Welcome to the Life After. This is Brady, like the bunch, Harden, and with me
and
as
this
always.
is Chuck, like the meat parson.
Oh, I get it, Chuck meat. Like, got it.
Like ground Chuck.
Thank you.
Take that however you guys want.
And hey, we've got a great episode with you today because we have our wonderful guest here, Jamie Lee Finch.
Hi, I have
That's her
nothing to
giggling.
say about what
Every
my
time
name
Jamie's
is
on the
adjacent
show,
to.
you hear her giggling
I immediately
in the background
laugh before you even know it's
introduce her.
me. Well, I feel like that really helps with this internet persona that people have, this idea that I'm just like angry all the time. So maybe when they hear me giggle, that'll help.
Who would play you
Maybe.
in a movie about you? Go.
Jamie Lee Curtis. No, I don't really think
was
that would
fast
be
as
it.
fuck.
What is this Vulcan
It is
Prime?
like-
You decided
stuff?
that right now.
This,
I love her. But no, I don't know, actually.
Spock
I've
Prime.
truly never actually thought about that because I think I've always just been like, fucking me, bitch.
Oh, okay.
Like, I'll do it.
Oh, yeah.
Which
That's
is-
an appropriately alpha Jamie
That's
response.
strong Enneagram 8 energy right
Yeah,
there.
right.
No one can play me, Brady.
Yeah, I mean, why would you have a shadow when
BFE,
you've
that
got the
big
real
Finch
thing?
energy.
Oh my god. So hey,
You heard it here.
you are like one of our biggest episodes of all time. You have changed.
Second biggest.
Don't do that.
You have Oprah people. You have changed lives. And
I liked his better. Keep going, Brady.
One of.
We're like bad cop, good cop, but we keep on changing.
I love
back and
it.
forth. And you've literally our conversation that we had at that time. I needed to hear it because it needed to push me on my deconstruction and to kind of get some of my shit, my body stuff, fucking worked out and everything.
Yep.
Changed my life, and then I literally
Yeah.
recommend people to go to this fucking old podcast episode of ours with Jamie.
Oh,
Changed
yeah.
my life, too.
Big time.
I should clarify
Oh, okay.
that
Oh.
that's the second most popular episode since we switched RSS feeds, which is actually saying a lot because it was recorded before we switched RSS feeds, so it hasn't
Yeah.
been a new episode on that.
Everybody,
Yeah, so
all of our
that's a
listeners are
lot of
so
downloads.
interested in RSS.
I'm going to believe that
We're
I'm
not going to
winning.
say what number
Yeah, you
one
definitely
is.
are
Just
winning.
about
You're definitely
winning.
winning. You're
I'm
definitely
winning.
winning.
If you want to find out what number one is, join our Patreon.
But
You'll get
but some really
exclusive
cool
behind the
but some
scenes
cool
content.
shit has happened since
Yeah.
you've come.
lot.
Yeah.
And what tell us what's happened since you've been on the show last.
Well,
Well,
I work for myself now.
Yeah.
huge.
Which was not the case then. And I mean, and I know I've said this to you guys on a personal level a lot before, but that podcast is that we recorded in, what was it, May 20? It was like exactly 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
That's
yeah,
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, like May 2017. It felt like after we recorded that, what my life felt like is that I was building an airplane as it was taking off.
Holy
Because
shit,
it was,
yeah.
I had actually given up
intense.
on what I thought like coaching or what that work could be because I didn't really know like what I was here to speak to. And then the combination of what I was studying in school and that unique moment when we had that conversation and the fact that it was recorded and, you know, available for public consumption for other people,
Right.
it just built the thing for me. And I've just been, I feel like in the last for the first year and a half after that, I feel like I was like just trying to keep up with it. And now at this point, I feel like in the last 6 months, I'm actually able to look forward at like what is ahead in doing this coaching work. And my wait list is like 350 people long. So, I mean, I'm feeling some urgency of wanting to make what I believe in and what I'm doing this coaching work from, like as much as I possibly can, make it available to as many people as possible. But the first part of how I feel like I've done that is that I wrote a book.
Yes.
Wrote a book.
I wrote a book. It's weird knowing that like this time 2 years ago, this book was living in me, but I didn't know who it was.
I love that.
I had never met it before. And then it exists. And that's kind of cute.
It's in the world.
That.
It's kind of cute.
Yeah, it's cute.
Oh, you got a little book baby.
I'm a little book baby. She's so cute. She's doing great, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking of Stephen King in his book on writing. He talks about discovering a book is kind of like digging out, like, and finding like a piece of the past, like archaeology or like
I
bones
love
or
that.
something. And you have to discover it. You don't have to create it.
Yes,
and
that's
so
it. Yeah.
It's cool that book was living in you because the message and the things that you were talking about that last episode legitimately healed and brought healing, and people brought to the realization that they need healing in ways that I don't think were available in any other way before.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And not because I think I'm like so uniquely special to have done something like no one else did, but because the way it feels for me is that I created the thing that I needed most because I wasn't finding it anywhere.
Oh, yes.
And so that's why I'm like, I have a deep, like full-bodied yes to you saying that. Cause I'm like, on some level, even making it is what healed, not even on some level, on a very deep level, making it is what healed me. Because I have some very specific like touch points of memories. It was writing the thing was, quote, supposed to only take me a year. And I let it take me a year and a half instead, which was its own journey to like let go of my own timeline. But what I know now is a big part of that is I actually had to go back. I went back to my dad's house and got 6 boxes of just stuff from my childhood, adolescence, early 20s. And I sat with her, like me at every age. And I read the notes she wrote to her friends and the things that they wrote to her and the journal entries and the poems. And I held off on writing for like 2 weeks. Once I got those books, it was September of this last year. And there was something that just didn't feel right about like the first draft that I had.
Yeah.
My advisors agreed, my program director agreed, and I was really, really well supported at Goddard. And it was really just me getting over the timeline I had in my head. And what I know now is going back and getting that stuff, like putting the writing process on hold for about 2 weeks because I just needed to talk to her and emote. And I just cried for 2 weeks. I had all this shit strewn around my room because I was like, I had vague memories of what it was like, but then I was reading like her correspondence from when I was in it. And I was like, this is extraordinarily fucked up. I am so sorry you ever felt this way about yourself. And I just wept with her. And it feels like in what I ended up writing and what exists now that people are able to have and connect with, she's in it. And she wasn't in it before.
There's such a big gap between intellectually acknowledging what's wrong with evangelicalism and then
really feeling
going
it.
back and like addressing your own personal
your
experience
younger self.
of
Yes,
evangelicalism.
absolutely.
It's totally different.
There is, yeah.
And I'm like, I personally, like, as a person that's like largely like not as far as I'm aware, not super affected by my religious trauma at this point in my life. As far as I'm aware, I'm just starting to like go back and like really like look at each stage and how it affected me because it was there from my earliest memories.
I've still got stuff even just as recent as in the last calendar week that my partner has been like, I mean, you say this thing a lot or this thing comes up a lot. From my perspective, as an utterly non-religious, non-American person has 11 years on me in age. Like, I'm not so certain about this. And then of course my immediate reaction is like, what are you talking about? Like double down, get defensive. And then when I step away from that and like listen to my body, I still have stuff that in this last week, my body is like, yeah, evangelicalism gave you that. Yeah, that thing, that dysfunction that you think that you need to do this. Like most recently, it was this expectation of like, I have to die for a cause and that's the only way I'll be loved. And I was like, oh yeah, I was reading books about martyrs when I was 9 years old.
Yeah,
right.
By
That's
DC
been in
Talk.
me. Yeah, that one. I told my partner
Jesus
about that
freaks.
one last night. He was like, what? And I was like, yeah, no, that's a thing.
What was the other big martyr book? Sorry.
Foxes.
Fox.
Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Fox's Book of Martyrs.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah.
ISBN number
yes.
1084887. I'm just kidding.
I'm glad you just said you were kidding because I was like, I'm not tracking. What did I miss
No,
about
I was
this?
naming
Brady's.
off the ISBN number because we used to work at a Christian
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Nerd shit.
Yeah.
The Isbin.
Isbin.
Another thing that's been really triggering to me to kind of do the whole reflecting on myself as a kid and everything is having a kid. And we've talked about that before previously on the show. And we're going to talk to some parenting people soon, and I'm really excited about.
That's cool.
But kind of having to because my kid is just a carbon copy of myself. It's disgusting in all the right ways. And so kind of understand my personality and, because my stuff is wrapped up in fundamentalism, being in an abusive home, being around people who are mentally. So it's like all these things all kind of go together. Yeah. But really what kind of opened my eyes to understanding, knowing my younger self was Marlene Winnell's book, The Unfold. Yes. And then you touched on it in yours. And
my God. Touched on it is generous.
You cite her
that
book
is
quite a bit.
So often. Y'all, she messaged me on Facebook, and I almost fell over.
She's so sweet.
She's so sweet, and
she's wonderful.
And it was also funny because she just was kind of she friended me and then messaged me and was saying hi, and then I gave her 2 paragraphs of how much I admire her, and then 2 weeks later she was like, "That's so lovely, thank you. We should keep in touch." And I was like, she's so I'm fawning over her here, and she's just her to her, and I'm like, you have no idea who you are to
for sure.
She's my book wouldn't exist without that book, and The Body Keeps the Score.
This podcast wouldn't exist.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And your profession wouldn't exist without the podcast. No. It's all Marlene.
It's all Marlene.
It's all Marlene. Let's start a Marlene cult. I'm just kidding.
Have we not already?
That touches on a really good point, because I thought that you did a really good job, better than most things that I've read, a really good job at presenting the manifold obstacles that are in place that keep you from leaving evangelicalism.
Wow, yes.
The layers and layers and layers of, once you think this, this is here, and that keeps you from going out that way. Right. Once you think this is here, that keeps you from going out that way.
Do you still think that way?
Yeah, I think so.
Because I play all that stuff like a computer program.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just a whole panel of elders from an Acts 29 church.
Explaining to you why the thing you think or the thing you think know has to be wrong somehow.
That is terrifying. That's my personal hell, is just standing in front of
That's my everyday.
A group of Acts 29
That was literally my weekly when I lived here.
And Darren, what's his face?
Oh, yeah. No, that was literally my weekly experience when I lived here in St. Louis, and I was wanting to move to Nashville to go to Grace Center, and I was going to August Gate. The 3 male pastors.
Tell me one story, please.
August Gate is an Acts 29 church.
Yeah, exactly. They are. The 3 Acts 29 church. The 3 male pastors insisted on sitting down with me weekly.
Damn girl.
In order to, I don't know what they would have maybe said about what, but they didn't trust that me deciding to go to Grace Center was the right decision. So they made me sit in a room with them once a week for hours, while I just essentially, what my body remembers about that is I would basically tell them, well, I'm reading this in the Bible right now, and this is essentially leading me to be I think signs and wonders might be a thing. I think that, and they literally just sat me in a room, 3 of them just staring at me. And when I would tell them what I was learning and what my personal experience with God was at the time, they would just fucking tear it down in front of me. And then at one point even told me that the reason why that they were just trying to protect me, right? The reason why they couldn't trust me, that this was the right decision for me to do, is because I was a single woman and I didn't have a husband to run it by.
Ooh. Fuck. So the person,
they were
2 out of the
BFE.
3 that you're mentioning, 2 out of the 3 intertwined with my story.
Yeah.
Because whenever I was disfellowshipped from the one church, I was trying to find another church to go to because I still believed. Mm-hmm. And I was a single dad. My son was an infant at the time. It was hard. And that was one of the churches I visited. But one of the elders from the previous church that disfellowshipped me contacted them, warned them about me. So my first real experience going there was going before 2 of them, telling them my entire story that involves being cheated on and, premature ejaculation and bad sexual side effects from being part of fundamentalism and, struggling with being gay. All of this, my entire fucking life story was my name is Brady.
That's fucking...
And then I had to I was guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
Yes.
And they heard my entire story, and I was and then I'm seeing a psychiatrist, a professional therapist.
They didn't like that,
He's
did they?
telling me that he's a Christian therapist, though, and he's telling me that this is spiritual abuse. And they're, well, I don't know if that's really spiritual abuse. I would just say it's a misunderstanding. No, fuck you. And that eventually I just stopped.
It's very creepy to me that they operated towards you initially, that they had some sort of entitlement to do that to you.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised.
I had to bargain for my ability to even be there.
Yeah.
And I know that people have that experience, and because of their sexuality or the color of their skin or anything like that, and it's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's bullshit.
Yep.
So, but that goes to my mind. It's like what we were saying of like hearing that sort of like.
Oh yeah. Okay, so all of the all of those like, okay, so this doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But if I go that route, there's just always something that draws you back in.
Yeah,
and you do such a good job on the first. I wish I could like break it down better, but just read the book. Like everybody should read the book. I really can't recommend this book enough. It is so well like laid out and articulated. Jamie basically like takes her own experience and says like, here are like the mechanisms that like keep all of us in, you know?
Yeah.
And it comes back to this religious trauma and the sort of cycle that causes.
Yeah.
So you do such a good job at talking about trauma in this context. Can you talk about how PTSD and religious trauma syndrome and these things like sort of start and show themselves later? Is that too big of a question?
No.
Okay.
I wrote a book about it. It's my favorite thing to shut people down on Twitter when I don't feel like getting into like a discussion. I'm like, I wrote a book about this. How dare you? And I'm like watching myself as I'm doing it. I'm like, for sure there are people who think that what I'm doing is like super conceited and I don't care.
Right.
And audiobook.
Also that, yes.
That's even better.
And it's my own voice.
It's so good.
I love it. And there will be a print version soonish. I'm working with some folks on getting that, which I'm really excited about. So I mean, as far as your question is, can you narrow that down a little bit for me when you're saying like to explain kind of like religious trauma and PTSD, like where it comes from, how that occurs? What are you mostly thinking of? Like what kind of experience are you thinking of when you're thinking of that?
Right. Okay, you quoted Peter Levine in your book a bit.
Maroon 5?
Yes. Peter Levine of Maroon 5, trauma expert. He at one point you quoted him saying trauma is defined by the body, by how the body responds to an incident, not the incident itself, right?
Yes.
Okay, so from a one of the problems with religious trauma is that it is not an individual event.
Yep.
It's like a massive. Like if you were to, it could be seen as an event, but it would be the event is the first 21 years of your life.
Right. Yes.
Or something.
A prolonged event.
Yeah, it's a prolonged event.
Yeah.
Or there are these
that
like
mostly,
you talk about how the idea of hell can like cause trauma, even though hell is not something that we experience personally.
Yep.
So can you talk about how religious trauma particularly is problematic because it's difficult to detect because of things like that?
Definitely. Great question, Chuck.
Thank you so much.
That's something that I feel like is one of the biggest reasons where I was like, I have to fucking write this book, is because I felt like when I first learned that trauma is more rooted in when you have a relationship towards trauma and you experience post-traumatic stress, and then if it's prolonged post-traumatic stress disorder and all the ways that affects you. When I first learned that doesn't even have to be something that you directly interacted with, it can just be an idea of a thing that traumatized you. My whole life made sense. Because I was like, oh, fuck, I didn't know I was looking for the permission to call the first 27 years of my life traumatizing. I did not know I needed that until someone, Peter Levine, explained to me via his many books that you don't have to actually, it can be something that you have either imagined as threatening or something that someone else has told you that you just feel threatened by. Like trauma is so incredibly subjective. And I think the reason why I felt so motivated to write this book is because I kept seeing people, this is a really overly simplified way to put it, I kept seeing people get that part wrong in public discourse. I kept seeing people invalidate the reality of religious trauma or being traumatized by a belief system or being traumatized by ideas because they're like, well, trauma's a car accident. You're fucking fine. You weren't hit. Wow. You weren't whatever. It was just this like, if your body wasn't directly impacted by a thing that directly hurt you, then that's not trauma. And the science, it's right there. And you gotta like dig for it and read the books, but like it is proven at this point that like, that's not the full story of trauma. So when you learn that that's not the full story of trauma, you get to kind of look back at your experiences and your beliefs. And it's not even so much, here's what I've been thinking about most recently in talking to people in in my professional work, and then also just like friends of mine who share this background, and like friends of mine are reading the book and wanting to talk about it. I had a friend who told me recently that she was like, there's a lot that you wrote about that resonated with me, but I know it resonated with my husband more deeply because, and basically when we got to the end, to the kind of meat of this conversation, what she was saying was that they grew up in similar religious environments, but his parents were very kind of authoritarian about it. Her parents encouraged critical thinking. Okay. And so I don't even think it's so much that hell is bullshit and no one should teach it or believe in it. But I actually think it's even like more so that's problematic is the combination of hell is a place and you don't get to decide differently. Like that level of indoctrination and authoritarian influence, as opposed to we believe hell is a place. What do you think? Like that, I feel like because when you look at trauma, it's the things that feel inescapable that are most traumatizing. Yeah. Right. And when you're told that hell exists and you don't get to decide about what you think about that idea becomes a reality to you that feels inescapable. And that's that's the thing that creates the unresolved event in your body that you then have to continually compensate for, or at least I did, over and over and over and over throughout the course of my whole life, particularly in my childhood, where I would like have these vivid visions and ideas. And the thing that was really confusing, I think I read this in the book. I don't know. I spent so long writing it. I have not read it back, and then reading it for the audiobook. But what I do remember is the confusion of taking that so seriously that it gave me panic attacks when I was a child. And then my parents going, "Oh, honey, you're taking this too seriously." Yeah.
Like,
what are you talking about?
Can I stop you there for a second? Yeah. Because this is like something really interesting that I have not heard a lot of commentary on, but I've been really interested in exploring. Is this a big part of the reason that our generation experiences so much religious trauma is that our parents' generation chose Christianity for the most part. Yes, yeah. And our generation was born into it. Yes. So for us, growing up, it was our entire reality. Yep. Whereas for our parents, it was an augmentation to the reality they had created. Yes, absolutely. So they were able to pick and choose what they let in and what they didn't.
That's a really good point.
Whereas we let everything in. Yeah. We didn't have a choice. To let everything in. And that is what that's part of the gap, and that's part of why we can't communicate with our parents, and it's part of why our parents don't understand why we're traumatized.
Yes, and they're just so emotionally stunted.
Well, you have
the Brene Brown of their
you're correct. Like you have the social shift that you're referring to, and then you also have the lack of awareness and accessibility to resources of like mental health, prioritizing like, hey, therapy's a thing, go talk to someone. My parents didn't hear that shit.
I mean, Christianity was the solution to their psychological issues instead of actual science. Yeah. But for us, the solution is getting away from it. So
because it wasn't working.
We'll never understand each other.
Right. Yes. You're right. And that's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's a I'm glad that's recorded, because I'm like, I feel like that's a phenomenal way to sum up what so many of us, because I mean, I do, as far as my clients go and people who have read the book or have interacted with me about this work that I do, it does by and large like run the gamut of like, I think youngest person I've had a conversation with about this stuff professionally has been like 19, oldest has been in their 60s, but by and large it's mid to late 20s from that age group to like early 40s.
Yeah.
And that again, that's those of us who were being parented by those people that exactly what you just said, like chose it. Like I know that for my dad, like my mother converted, but for my dad, it was very much his parents had been centered for, or that's something they chose later in life, because they both had my grandparents on my dad's side had such family instability that the idea that like Billy Graham was putting out, which he was mostly giving people directives about like the way to like create a cohesive like nuclear family and then also God. And so that, I think that message was so appealing to my parents or to my grandparents who had both experienced in different ways being orphaned at the age of 12, that then they were like, wow, we want to create a different environment, different life for our children. And so then they kind of were like, well, social structure, the social structure that the church is offering to us.
Right.
And I've talked to my uncle about this too, which is so interesting because my uncle does not understand what happened to my dad. My uncle is super liberal.
Okay.
And he's like, he left the church like as soon as he could. And my grandparents never had a problem with that. And my uncle is like, I don't understand, like, I mean, this is my phrasing, not his, but he's like, I don't understand what radicalized your dad, because we were not brought up that way. It was truly, this is where our parents found meaning. And they made it very clear to us that this is where they found meaning, but they didn't expect us to find the meaning there too. So you're completely correct, Chuck. There's something that shifted for like our parents and that generation. And it didn't even shift for everyone, because it's weird. My uncle and my dad are two, vastly different people.
Right.
And neither one of them understand each other, because they both feel like they arrived at the conclusions that their parents set up for them, which is so interesting.
I didn't realize how common some of our background was, because you came from a very Southern Baptist background, and so did I. And when you were describing yourself as a kid, like very existential crises and all of these, that was fucking me to the core.
Yeah.
And eventually went to Calvinism, something that was a lot more formal.
Yeah.
For me, my family there was abuse. My dad was, cheating, and he was physically and emotionally abusive. My mom has some mental health issues that wasn't easy. And so there was no stability, but Calvinism seemed great.
Right.
Because everything was secure and stable.
And certain.
And I could predict it, and I can figure it out,
Literally predetermined.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, what did the Calvinist say when he fell down the stairs?
I'm glad that's over.
Yeah.
What?
Glad that's over with.
Okay, two things. Number one, that joke's great. Second of all, that delivery was flawless, gentlemen.
We're on point. We're on point.
Baby.
Wow.
So I wanted to take kind of like a little bit of an object lesson, I guess.
This is fun.
Yeah. And I'm kind of winging it, so bear with me here. So you mentioned in your book that you came to the conclusion at one point that you were a sex addict because you could not control
I literally
your
just
sexual
talked
desires.
with a client today about this.
Yeah. So and that was like, I was like, oh fuck yeah, that's pretty legitimate. I mean that's like parallels my story for sure.
Oh yeah.
I went to group therapy for quote unquote porn addiction, but it was really broader sex addiction.
And I laugh because porn addiction isn't real.
No,
just
it's not
so
real.
Everybody knows.
Right.
It's not.
You're probably just insanely depressed or anxous or have PTSD.
You're addicted to the shame.
So
not
okay,
the porn.
But what happens is so you're presumably engaging in some kind of compulsive sexual behavior, something that you
Well, that's the fun part, Chuck. I wasn't.
Okay.
I was just thinking about having sex because I was 23 years old, and I thought that's what was wrong with me.
Well, this hypothetical
going,
person
though.
that I'm talking about is engaging in some kind of negative. Some kind of negative compulsive sexual behavior that they're not comfortable with. Right?
Sure.
Like for me, it was like inappropriately, flirting with like my friend's wife or something. Like in a way that's like crossing the line.
Okay.
And that was a manifestation of my own trauma, right? That was like in
shame
reality,
is feeding that.
In reality, that was shame feeding that, but it was also like trauma from repressing my sexuality.
Absolutely.
For a really long time.
Yeah. So you're moving towards where the desire lives.
It is.
And there's technically nothing wrong with that, but when you don't know that that's what you're doing,
right,
you pathologize it.
It was literally my own sexuality trying to make room for itself in my body.
Good.
And it was not doing that.
Yeah.
But to go back to what I was saying about how you do such a good job at explaining how the system ropes you back in, right? Like you get out there and you do the thing and then you feel terrible about it. And then you say, oh, I did that because I was rebelling against God.
Yeah.
I need God so that I can fix that. So you go back into the system that caused the problem in the first place.
It's a closed loop.
And that's an example.
Yep.
Right. You could do that with any kind of negative behavior.
Yes.
That is considered quote unquote sinful.
Yep.
Right. And that's a shame cycle, but it's also a manifestation of trauma.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yes.
So
absolutely.
Let me ask you this. Run down some ways that some of our listeners could look at reflect on their own lives and say, these are manifestations of trauma. Because I was reading your book, and as somebody that knows a lot about trauma, I was like surprised to be like, oh, fuck.
Like, oh, that too.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a manifestation of trauma.
Man, I think, okay, so I haven't really fully thought through this because it's just the first thing that's coming up right now. I've been thinking a lot recently about the word should and how uncomfortable I am with it in general. And I've heard from people who have had maybe their therapist or their coach, their counselor, whoever, tell them. One person recently, and I can't remember where I saw this from, so if it's you, I'm sorry, I'm not crediting you, say that their therapist literally doesn't allow the word should in their room when they're working together. I think that any place in which you are shoulding on yourself is a pretty good indicator.
You should yourself?
You should yourself.
What is that smell?
It's should. Any place in which you catch your inner monologue saying I should not have or I should, and your desire is telling you something differently, at least deserves to be slowed down and looked at.
Wow.
There is
hard stop.
Yeah, honestly.
Hard stop. That's
stop.
intense.
It's it is, and I also, so part of the reason why I'm seeing this more clearly now is because as I'm moving away from decentering, obviously years ago I decentered being an evangelical, and now I'm decentering being a former evangelical, and I feel my body really being able to fully embrace being a witch. And the thing about witchcraft is that it actually works with the energy of desire on purpose.
Okay.
Whereas you have maybe some spiritual traditions that are like, oh, the end of desire, the resistance to desire is like what leads to enlightenment. Witches don't believe that. It's a whole big long thing. I'm literally recording 2 podcasts tomorrow about that. So stay tuned, folks. But there is something, I feel like, at the very least, desire is information. And the only thing making you think that that desire needs to be pathologized is that somewhere along the line, you either got good advice or bad advice telling you to resist that desire. It's your job to figure out if that was good advice or bad advice. And usually when a should is going to show up, it's pretty often that was bad advice.
Oh.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's such a manipulative phrase that gets so entwined in everything that we do.
Yes.
There's a video game that touches on that where they thank you kindly, and kindly was like this trigger word that kind of made you just do whatever he said.
Whoa.
And that's what it kind of feels like.
That feels so gross and manipulative.
But it's such good story writing.
It is good.
I'm
That's
intrigued.
impressive. I don't even like video games, and I'm like, I want to play that.
There's a traumatizing thing that you brought up in the book that hit me. We always talk about fight and flight, but one word that you're talking about is feelings of inescapable, like feeling stuck and freeze.
Well, I'm going to let you finish that thought, but like all I could think about when I was reading that was like sitting in a pew.
Oh,
right.
Oh, shit,
like
man. Yes.
Like you are in a position where it's like not appropriate for you to leave, but you're being fed traumatizing information.
Yes.
And you can't go
and
anywhere.
Your body is
like
screaming,
you might be freezing in that moment, but
truly.
you would never know because you're just sitting in a pew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Have you ever been called out, like even like in a sermon for something good or something where?
Oh yeah. Where the pastor's like, Chuck last week served the homeless, and he did a great job.
There was always like that electric feel that would kind of like
a spotlight hits you in a dark room,
and it's not a great feeling.
It's not,
and it's not a horrible feeling. It kind of has to do with that time, but then you kind of grow to like expect it, and it's just I hate that. I don't.
Yeah.
Observe,
especially when you're a part of a charismatic community that does
where they can read minds,
read minds, and they're prophetic at you, and so it's like you don't know when they're just gonna pick you and tell you things about yourself, and but then you have this weird But
what is that? Okay, I'm gonna stop you for a second. What does that feel like right now? We're running into a situation online where there's problems with people doing that exact thing of calling out what you say and your intentions and applying that to you in a public space. That's what it feels like to me.
It feels like freeze.
And it sucks.
It feels like the response, or and I've had someone point this out to me. That's as we're figuring out more about the fight, flight, response, PTSD response, development to PTSD. There's 5 of them. There's fight, not 3. There's fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and then one I cannot remember. But I have a client who's been centering fawn.
I think it's fuck.
Fuck. That I think that was mine. That's been mine for a while. Sex switch. I compensate through fucking.
What does fun mean?
Fun. It means you kind of play into the whims of your abuser. You try and compensate for, or try and what's the word I'm looking for? Like satiate, appease. That's it. Yes, you try and appease your abuser, and that's your survival tactic.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so there's a part of me I'm like, I feel like already even the book that I just wrote last year is already a little outdated, because I love science. I love that it does. My book needs to be partially wrong in 2 years. Like I need us to find out more things. Right. So the freeze response, or that fawning response, I'm seeing both of those happen a lot, especially as we're figuring out who we all are in online spaces, and like how everyone is a little bit on edge about like, if I make one misstep, I'm going to get canceled. Yeah. And there's some of that's freeze, and some of that's fawn. There's an overcompensation that can happen where you're fawning and you are fawning over. And because you're like, please don't target me. Please don't cancel me. Please don't abuse me in some way. So I think that's the interesting thing about trauma, though, is there's no way for you to be able to plan for ahead of time what your unique trauma response is going to be. Yeah. You can't.
Yep. And it could be different for each situation too, because it's triggering back to different things.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Fuck. I'm a fawner at times.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think likely, we all have a little bit of each one. Again, I don't know. Talk to someone who knows about the brain more than I do. But like, I've seen fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And I'm sure if I could remember the other one, I've seen that too. Come up, I could probably, if I sat here long enough, name for you 2 or 3 instances off the top of my head where I responded in each of those ways. Yeah. That's again why trauma is so hard to pin down, because there's no formula for what happens and then you respond and how do we see it clearly.
So much trauma comes from people who are not aware and they're narcissistic. Yeah. Fawning just it's kind of like the yin to that yang.
Yeah.
You know, it's an instant diffusal of that situation. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us did that with God. If there was something bad happening, we would just roll on our backs and say, we're worthy of this suffering.
I agree with you. I'm so bad.
You're
Please
so
love
great.
me so I can be good
thank
again.
Thank you for this cancer. Yeah. Thank you for.
Well, that's why I thought that the best thing for me to possibly do, like this is what I've been unpacking last week, is like over the last week, is that, a lot of the way I live and move and function now, at least in part, is informed by the fact that when I was younger, because I was being abused and my home wasn't safe and all of that stuff, the idea of God was the only safe place for me. And what I was being told by just my environment, Southern Baptist, the specificity of my church, those people, is that if you really want to do the best possible thing and make God love you the most, you die for God. So from 8 or 9 years old, I was like, then that's what I'll do, because I am so desperately need to be loved, and my family's not going to love me. My mother's not going to love me. I need God to love me. So God, I'll die for you. And that still 20 plus years later has informed the way that I then respond to certain things that are happening socially, where my partner had to be really honest with me about some stuff the other night. And he was like, you have work to do. And it's not you getting thrown in prison for driving a stranger across the border to get an abortion.
Right.
It's not that.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like, and of course, immediately I'm like, but it has to be that. Like, at the very least, I need to be willing to do it. Right. But it's like, then the longer I sat with that with my body, I was like, why do I go there immediately? Yeah. Why do I go to no, I'll die for this immediately. Right. And I'm not saying that maybe that isn't where I'll end up anyway. And I'm not saying that that's not something I want to be willing to do if I needed, but this is so I'm big. Like, holy shit, my early years were entirely formed with, I will only be loved if I die on behalf of a cause.
Yeah.
That's fucking it. And I'm like, have I built a persona for the last 20 years of my life, my own persona towards myself on that?
It's not even necessarily I'll only be loved, but it's that I will be loved the most.
The most.
We're valued.
I will be the most, or I'll be the most effective. Yeah, valued the most.
Yeah. By what we can give to that religion and what we can offer. Right. And it's so disgusting if you really look at it and knowing,
And And I just wonder, like, how often do I do that with things?
Yeah.
Like, I know that, like, I am a perfectionist, and that holds me back in a lot of ways, because nothing that I make is perfect, right? So I don't finish things because they're not perfect.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, like, is that out of a sense of martyrdom? Is that out of a sense of like, this has to be like the only completion that we experience in this life is death. So is the fact that I can't complete things because I'm not dying to finish a song?
Oh my
Can I
God.
give you a recommendation
Wow.
without like imposing a lot of advice onto you?
Sure, whatever, Brady.
Brene Brown talks about this, that it's kind of like a defense mechanism of vulnerability, that perfectionism can keep us from being vulnerable with other people because we're trying to keep those cards close to our chest of who we are, but showing that vulnerability, showing that you could mess up and some, audio could be wrong or that you may look stupid.
Being
at
seen
a time.
in process. Yeah.
That's a big thing for me because with dogmatic fundamentalist backgrounds, we're used to just receiving something that we all consider collectively perfect and untouchable. But we were not that type of person. And so now as we're trying to kind of like go through this process of figuring out who we are, we're not very forgiving of ourselves because we expect instant perfection instead of there being a process of evolution.
Yes.
Right.
That's been a big theme that I've been dealing with that's been carried over from my old fundamentalist background.
I'm really in this moment right now, I'm actually very struck by how, because I've known you both for many, many years, but then even just like thinking
like
about
a solid
this
15 now,
15 for us for sure,
16
like maybe
probably.
close to 10-ish for us.
10-ish,
Yeah.
whatever.
I'm really struck by how much, even just in the last 2 years, from our first conversation in this kind of setting to now, how much growth all three of us have experienced.
Oh,
and
for sure, yeah.
I feel
wild,
like that's really important to even vocalize and like.
I didn't know what trauma was when we did our first interview.
Well, and that,
I didn't know shit about trauma.
Like the diagnosis, yes, but also the healing, like the medicine too. Like the ways in which you're like, man, am I getting caught in my perfectionist tendencies? And like you talking about vulnerability and like me talking about being seen in process and like being like, oh my God, do I want to die because I think that's what will make God love me? Like, and I feel like the reason why I want to say that, especially in this space where it's like recorded and people will listen to, is because I feel like that is something that I'm constantly talking about with my clients. The session I had right before I came over here today was literally having to drive home. We talked about hard stuff for an hour and I was like, but you are on the right path. Don't change a thing. You're on it. You're in pursuit of the thing. Just because it doesn't feel like it's working right now, or just because something hasn't changed since yesterday doesn't mean you're not doing the work. Like you are doing it. Like, so when you get to have moments like this and conversations like this, where from our perspective, and that's why I'm like sitting here, I'm like, wow, I'm remembering not necessarily the stuff we recorded when we were talking about 2 years ago, but the stuff that like when we went out to lunch and the stuff we were recording, like talking about when we weren't recording, I'm seeing such immense growth. Yeah. And sometimes that perspective is so helpful for when you are recovering and healing, because the subconscious is a son of a bitch. Like it just, it hides things from you. Up. And if you were, and going back to what you were talking about with parenting, like if you were parented inside of this belief system and you were not allowed to question it, you were not allowed to develop critical thinking in regards to it, then your subconscious developed between ages 0 and 7 for these things to be unquestionable about how the world works, about who is in charge of the universe, and who you are as a person. And unlearning this is incredibly brave, and it also takes a very long time. Right. But that doesn't mean that you don't get touch points along the way of like, wow, this is vastly different and I fought for this, and that's worth celebrating.
If you were going to die tonight, do you know where
Stop. Just tell them about our website.
Oh, just tell them to go to thelifeafter.org?
Yes, they can go now, even without accepting Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. thelifeafter.org. We have a blog, contact page, a link to our Facebook page, and more.
All right, thelifeafter.org.
Heavenly.
It's huge to be able to stop and to think to yourself and recognize in other people, holy fuck, we're growing.
Yeah.
this isn't just talking. We're not just talking shit
Right.
on some fucking podcast or whatever, but talking about these things, having vocabulary for them, which is a big thing that Marlene Winnell did for us.
Yes.
And then you're coming back and doing, and we're able to do it, the podcast and all these other resources, collaborating together and saying, let's build a vocabulary for this so people can talk about their narratives.
Yeah.
They could talk about how they're healing, and that talking is bringing healing.
Yeah.
Yep.
You touch on that in your book. What is it? Storytelling.
Storytelling is as like utilizing storytelling as a healing modality,
Yeah.
which is what I do in my coaching work, period. But then also it's something that, I cannot remember his name. Maybe it's worse in there, but there's there's been some research and study and science behind just like literally opening up and sharing your stories, like facilitates healing processes in your brain and in your body. And I think part of that, at the very least, part of that is just the removal of shame. Like the amount of times that in my client work where someone will say something and I will just make note of the fact that I'm like, did you notice that I didn't go anywhere? Did you notice that I'm still here? Like, have you noticed that? Because this thing, whatever it is that you just said that you were so afraid of saying, lived in you as this thing that you were so afraid of saying because you thought someone would disconnect relationship with you if you showed it. Did you notice? Like, I haven't flinched. Like that gets to be a part of the new story that you are constructing about who you are and that thing that you just said. Like that's how you start to decenter a shame response. And I mean, Brene Brown, like that's her whole thing in like decentering shame is you can't really heal from that unless you can't really develop vulnerability without just fucking being vulnerable.
Yes.
Right.
The only way out is through. It's really fucking hard, but I think that like it's hard and it's valuable. And I don't know if you can unlearn an authoritarian construct that tells you that perfection is not only expected, but necessary. I don't know if you can unlearn that idea of how to relate to yourself and other people without just being willing to be seen in process.
Wow.
And being willing to kind of show up and say, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't know if this is safe to say, but I feel like I trust you, and my body is telling me this is safe, so I'm going to say it. And can you maybe just hold this space with me?
I know I had a huge problem with my, particularly my first therapist. I got a little bit better, but my first therapist was like, every time you come in here, you already have everything figured out.
I get it.
I just talk about something
You
that I
go and be
already
like,
figured out.
Here is a report on here's the things that I've worked on.
Let me show you all my victories in the last week.
Let me pay you $100 to listen to my essay about what I've already accomplished.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and it's still a challenge to me to this day to go into my therapist's office and talk about something that I haven't processed.
Yes.
It's really difficult.
It's
for
hard.
me to do.
Yeah.
I mean, of
because
course.
I'm not articulate. I'm stumbling over my thoughts and ideas. I'm just saying what happened.
Yeah.
And it's just like, so what are you going to do with it, man?
You're just being a human, but like, but being
You're very
a
articulate, by
human
the
was
way.
something that was vilified. Period. Don't let Twitter hear that, guys.
Okay, so this will bring us back to trauma, right? Because we are talking about, I mean, we're still talking about trauma, but
Always talking about trauma.
right, trauma makes the world go round, man.
It really does.
It's the
Literally and figuratively,
it's
actually.
the explanation
'cause
for
you got
literally
hit by that
everything
other
that's ever
rock
happened. Oh my God.
No, I'm being serious. I'm looking at it from a
There was impact.
Right.
There was
Yeah,
impact and it branched off and it just
And now here we are.
repeating in the same cycles over and over and over.
The earth
God,
really
that's bleak,
needs to deal with
isn't
its
it?
shit.
She really does. We need to get the earth some therapy.
She's going through
Okay,
some
so
mama.
the process of dealing with trauma is, you describe it as providing language for somatic experience.
Oh, I love that.
Which somatic, it just means like in the body as
Yeah.
opposed to in the mind, right? Because we have this hippocampus brainstem divide and amygdala divide where trauma is stored in one part of the brain and you don't remember.
Yeah.
You don't have like words or memories for it.
Yeah.
And in a big part of that is just being open and talking about your experiences. And part of the reason that our community and this post-evangelical movement is functional is because it's a lot of people providing language for other people
Yes.
to understand their own trauma,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about that, about the process of building language and
Yeah. Well, I think
desensitizing?
yes, I think that that's something that, whether it's responses you guys have received from doing like this podcast in general, or responses I've received from the episodes I've recorded with y'all or with other people. That's something that I think is, I really love that that's a relatively new way that people can gather information. Like, I love podcasts for that reason, because you can like literally, it's like you're listening in on a conversation that other people are having when you're just kind of in the room. I also really love podcasts because when I listen to them, I'm like, oh, people are talking and I don't have to respond. And that feels great. Because I talk for a living.
God,
I respond for a living.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, this is really nice.
Yeah.
Just listen to Pete Holmes talk to someone else for like 2.5 hours. I think that what is so helpful about this is when you hear your experience in someone else's story, oftentimes you don't even know it was your experience until you hear someone else say it.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's something that kind of lights up in your body. And that's, I mean, what I know to be true for, you know, just using the Unbuckling the Bible Belt episode here, like the amount of people that I still now, like a few times a week, will get messages from people who are like, oh my God, this, like, they say some form of this put language to what I went through. Or I know Linda K. Klein, when she wrote her book Pure, she was hearing that nonstop from people, probably still is consistently, like people who are like, holy shit, you said the thing. You said the thing. I mean, she labored over that book for 12 years to be able to say the thing.
Yeah.
And there's something absolutely invaluable about that, because it does.
She did 12 years worth of labor for 1 million people.
Yes,
you know,
that's exactly it. And then when they grab hold of it and they have this like, oh, fuck, like that's me too. Like that's me too. And then they have someone else who did that work to show that experience, to give language to that story. And then people can grab hold of that. And what I really want and hope that people will do is that they will then take that and realize, I need to go share this story with a professional. I need to go share this story with someone who can help me find my way out of here. I think communal spaces of support are also vital, but they are not, I don't think they can function solely for people to heal. But I think that people being able to find the presence of their personal experience, to find their personal experience centered in someone else's narrative, is what often opens up people's ability to see their own story more clearly. And I think someone else owning this happened to me. And I mean, that's kind of what happened to me too. Like when I left the cult that I was in England, it was like 9 months where I was like, I could not understand what had happened to me, and my body and my brain were reacting all these ways. And then I read someone else's story about their time so I was with the House of Prayer in Europe, and I read their story about International House of Prayer in Kansas City, and I saw the parallels. I saw my experience and this person sharing their story, and it literally felt like a light switch just flipped on. And I went from one moment having no idea about anything to the next moment being like, I was in a cult. It literally was that fast. I'm not saying it has to be that fast for it to be legitimate, but it can be like, and because that's the power of seeing your experience in someone else's story. And that's what's interesting to me about one of the things that there's like a bunch of stuff like with this book that I'm just like, there's elements of it that I know I fought for that like no one will know. Like there's certain parts of it that feel more valuable to me than others, because like there are parts of it that were way harder to do. And I remember my second reader at one point telling me early on, like first like 6 months of the research and writing process, where he was like, yeah, cool, you got a lot of good information here, you got a lot of research, where are you? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, where's your story? Like you're basically like waxing poetic about how bullshit St. Augustine is for like 12 pages. Like, yes. Okay. Interesting that you want to talk about where the idea of, original sin came from, but like what will make this the most compelling is you telling your story. And that was the thing I knew I was resisting the most, because that's the most vulnerable possible thing.
Yep.
And he said this thing to me where he was like, look, if everything you're saying is true about what you went through and what you experienced, and he wasn't saying it wasn't, he was like, yes, I agree with you, your experience is correct. But if that's the case, what it sounds like to me is that the main thing that they did that harmed you is they stole your voice.
Right.
So you need to get it back. Like all the more reason for you to tell your own story in this thesis.
Wow.
And that was so, I mean, it really is one of those moments, like we hear about this stuff all the time, you're like, I'll never forget it. It really, I mean, I never will. It was so compelling. And so I feel like that, and what I hear from people, sure, the research is helpful, but it's me sharing the specificity of my personal story that is allowing people the permission to connect with the research to begin with. Because they're like, oh, if you lived this and I lived something similar, and then you're realizing that this science backs up what happened to you and what you lived, maybe I get to use that science too and go find a therapist where I can say, this was trauma. Like it, without sharing my personal story, I mean, there's no way to know because that's not the world we live in, but I don't think it would have landed in that same way. And I think that's true for everyone.
What convinced us as kids was stories.
Yeah.
It was being told this is the truth, this is what happened. Yeah. And we didn't have the ability to question what those things are true. What's getting us out is be able to tell our story of what we've gone through. And Chuck, you know, you have to hear about my Joseph Campbell bullshit obsession often.
Every fucking episode. And so do all of our listeners.
But
bring him into this one.
But it kind of brings
really
into it, you know, that, and I don't, and it's not just him, because I think that should be a more inclusive story that our generation needs to start telling. It isn't just a man going and fighting for women or whatever, but we need to have more narratives that reflect who we are today. Joseph Campbell, I think, is instrumental in that. But the thing is, storytelling changes so much because it creates empathy. Yeah. I didn't really have empathy as a kid, and so I really loved stories. I was always reading an R.L. Stine book. And
you were allowed to read those?
Yeah. Well, my fundamentalism was different than a lot. I went to public school and everything because I had a bad home life. My parents were divorced, and so I was kind of like, brought up by television and video games and R.L. Stine books, but I loved his books because it talked about kids who had messed up home lives. Oh, wow. There are some kids who who had step brothers or whatever. Nobody in my life understands my step family.
R.L. Stine was Goosebumps, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Love him. But those stories create
he did
empathy.
that on purpose.
Oh, for sure.
So. I bet he did. That's really amazing.
I have a master class of his downloaded out the whole
Oh, you do? That's so great.
But, the thing is, stories allow us to empathize with one another. Yeah. And one thing that I've noticed as like a gay person, that stories that I could tell about things that I experience, other people are able to relate to, even though they come from a different type of oppression or different type of minority. And so that sort of intersectionality of stories and be able to tell each other's experiences allows us to see through other people's minds and kind of understand things from a different perspective. Yeah. Which doing that, I've had to put myself in my own perspective, understanding who I was as a kid. Yeah. And it's kind of allowed me to heal and create kind of just storytelling after storytelling after storytelling. Yeah. Layer upon layer has just brought so much healing to me.
And I think that something you just said about that too, that I think is really important, which speaks to not only what I try and hold space for in my client work, but then also the way it felt to write this book, is kind of creating that experience where current adult you speaks to younger you and provides language to younger you with unresolved trauma, or shows up for younger you with that unresolved trauma in the way that you needed and didn't have then.
Be the adult you needed as a kid.
There's an aspect of this that in storytelling being healing, it's not just what happens externally, where what we share with other people allows us to heal and them to heal too. It's that kind of internalized storytelling too, where you're giving perspective, releasing compassion, releasing, removing shame from the past experience. Like the amount of times that in client sessions where something has clicked, where I'll watch the person that I'm working with kind of realize that younger them was just doing the best that they could with what they had at the time. And there's something that fundamentally changes in that moment. And what you're doing then is you're providing younger you with a different story than the survival story that you had to have in order to get to here. So it's this like equal parts, like, I know more now, let me help you release that story. And also let me thank you for getting us here. Because like we wouldn't, like I think about that all the time with like in regards to like my younger self and my body. I'm just like, this stuff that I'm now perceiving as dysfunctional, I would not have been alive had you not developed that pattern. Yes. Because you have the habits you have because they're giving you something you believe that you need.
Sure.
And that's the whole thing about being in relationship with your body is you get to continually, if it is a relationship and it's ever evolving, ever growing, ever changing, you get to constantly kind of check in about those and reevaluate and create the new story. But there's really no space for like hostility or shame about whatever your previous story was, because your body developed that because they love you and they knew at the time that is what you most needed to get you to here. And there's just something really powerful about using that storytelling as healing. Again, not just external, but also internal, where you're like, hey, 8-year-old me, I see you. You did a great fucking job. We can let that go now though. Like we don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
I love you so much for knowing that we needed that then, but we can write a new story together now.
God.
Fucking cool. I love it.
And I get to do this as a parent.
That's
like literally
extra awesome.
Yes.
That is so
awesome. Hilo's got a good life.
So right after your book, I read Cindy
Wang Bryant.
Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
And hers is about parenting. I'm just like, oh my God.
Is it parenting unfundamentalist or what is it?
Parenting forward.
Parenting forward. That's right. Yes. Okay. So I'm really glad she wrote that. I think we were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, but I think because for me, if you really wanted to get me down into the brass tacks of what, like, okay, you wrote this book, but like, now what? Like, what's the plan? What do we do moving forward? My primary thing, if not maybe my only idea of like what to do forward is we have to stop teaching traumatizing doctrines to children.
Yeah.
That is how we will see this uniquely traumatizing religion of evangelical Christianity, white evangelical Christianity. That is how we will see this leave the earth. That is what I think will tear it down, is to stop indoctrinating children. So because I think that, but I don't have the experience of being a parent, I'm really fucking happy to see that there are resources, and hopefully will become more resources that speaks directly to that experience of how to not parent your children in that way. What was interesting, my sister and my dad came to my thesis presentation back in March, and I didn't know how that would go. I had a long conversation with my dad beforehand to kind of be like, this is what you're getting into. You can skip my presentation if you want, because you had to present in order to graduate.
Yeah.
So I was like, come for the graduation. You can skip the presentation, but I'll answer any questions now. He did opt into going, which ultimately was like fine, but almost like in a frustrating way, which is
I get it.
But what happened with my sister was actually really, really interesting, because my sister's always been a very level-headed, I think, very healthy person in her ability to kind of hold space for multiple ideas and seemingly opposing ideas. She's great. And when I was younger, I didn't understand it, and I thought it was a character flaw. So now that I'm older, I'm like, can I have more of that, please? She said, like, and for context, my sister is still, I mean, I think she would definitely say that she's an evangelical. Mm-hmm. She and her husband go to kind of a mega church-ish, 45 minutes like west of here, and they're raising their kids inside that environment. And when she said a few really amazing things to me that whole weekend, but one of the things that she said was, she was like, I'm just I'm curious how I can make sure that I'm parenting. Like, I'm wondering how I can make sure that I'm parenting my kids so that they don't inherit the same trauma we did. And she didn't just mean that like from our parents. She meant that literally from this religion. And I was like, when she said, I was like seeing those wheels turning.
Yes.
Like she meant it.
Yes.
And she's trying to figure out how to hold space for, because what I will say is their experience with my sister and brother-in-law, their marriage was in a really tough spot. And church, I would say the social structure of the church really came through for them in a way that helped their marriage heal.
Good.
They call that God. That's fine. I see it differently, but so for her, holding on to God is a really, really important thing. But she also listened to my 45-minute presentation and was like, I see merit here. How do I make sure I'm not parenting that way?
That's
and
wonderful.
That's a complicated question.
Huge,
and maybe I need to send her Cindy's book, but I mean, I also don't know if she's ready for that. But
I would say a huge part of sorry.
Cindy's book would be great, actually. And it's still kind of written towards people who might believe in God.
Right.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
I would say a big part of what's going to contribute to that kind of toxic doctrine being passed from generation to generation is the bigger conversation about mental health. that's happening?
Oh, yes.
Right, like
Yeah.
the reason that our parents clung to Christianity was because they didn't have other answers, right?
Yeah,
but
it's
we
true.
have better answers
We
now
do.
that are easier and clearer
And
and don't
built on
require
observation.
built on observation and don't require you to like devote your life to an ambiguous, system.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. It's just being
think so,
aware
yeah.
of like what it means to be a healthy person
The
and how to
big
get there.
will he won't day of whether God's going to send people to hell, and all of us are at the edge of our seats.
Right,
like, oh my
right.
God, is he going to do
It
it?
was like the sickest,
He
like
was
the
a
most
pastor, but
disgusting
he was
reality
gay.
show of all
Where's he
time.
going?
Like, what's he gonna do? I don't know.
Yeah.
Which is why, again, going back to like, why were people telling me to calm down when I was freaking out about hell when I was 8? I was like, why
Yeah.
are you not as riled
Yeah,
up
I'm
as
like,
I
yeah.
am?
Do you
Yeah,
know
and
the
that's
existential crises
that
I'm
generational
having?
gap, man.
That-
It just was not as real
Truly.
for them. It was just
No.
not as real for
I
for
think
that
you're right.
generation.
Yeah.
So okay, I want to shift gears a little bit. How do I say this? Trauma lives in the body, right?
Yes.
That's the name of a very
Who's
The body
in the
keeps score.
house? Trauma.
the body. Yeah, that's
It's true.
who's in the house?
Who's in the house?
Religious
Where?
trauma.
So there's Carmen.
Tell me who's in the okay.
Carmen was still a little much for my family, so I don't even have that.
Carmen was not
context.
enough for my family.
Oh,
My mom was quite charismatic.
He was just all right.
Oh God,
like Jesus? Like Jesus is
Yeah.
still all right?
that's
Yeah.
DC talk.
Was that one them?
Jesus,
They
still.
all- It was actually the Doobie Brothers.
The Doobie,
actually.
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, right.
Actually, yeah, it was. They were sampling the Doobie. Well,
I
they
mean, yeah.
were
but-
doing whatever, doing that thing. Anyway, so okay, so
Trauma's in the body.
amygdala hijack, right? So you have trauma.
Good band name.
Amygdala hijack. I'm giving you that one, guys.
Thank you. It's mine.
Whoever's got it, yeah. If you when you have trauma and you experience something that that reminds your brain of that of that experience, your amygdala takes over. You have this fight or flight instinct. Your body reacts a certain way.
Yeah.
So we have this conundrum, right, in Christianity, like in the post-evangelical community, where we have this 2 times compounded issue where you're taught not to trust your body because it's evil, but then you have trauma, so you can't trust your body all the time. So you've gotten over the my body is evil stuff, but now you're like, oh,
But
well,
my
but
body
I'm
has been
traumatized.
harmed.
My
Yeah.
body's been harmed,
Yeah.
and now I'm freaking out every time I, see a couch that looks like a pew or whatever, whatever it is. It can literally be things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you have anything? I have not heard of terribly good answer for this. I think it's something we're still figuring out. But how do you learn to trust your body and when? Do you have any comment on that?
This is my whole secret sauce, Chuck.
This
you let me
is
give
the
it away for
secret
free.
sauce. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
It is so layered. You know
we
what's
should just
funny?
end the podcast here and say to
Like,
seek further.
go enroll in my course that will be available probably a year from now,
Yeah.
or get on my wait list.
Patreon exclusive.
All right. Well,
Right?
thanks
Right?
everybody for listening.
All right, this has been wonderful. Thanks, guys. No, okay, but in all seriousness, that's even a
Cliff Notes.
hard question to answer. Like every time someone, believe it or not, guys, I'm not trying to be an asshole on Twitter all the time, but when someone asks me that question in that context, or even a context like this, it's hard to even know how to answer, because I'm like, this is why my career is built on answering that question, is because it takes 4 to 6 months for me to introduce that concept alone to people about how to start doing that, like what that paradigm shift looks like. And it begins in my whole thing about like centering, your body as a person, not an object, not a machine, not a vessel of sin, whatever. And so it is, but I even hearing myself give that answer, I'm like, but that even makes me uncomfortable, because then that to me feels like I am unintentionally saying as if I have access to this secret and you have to come to my space to get this secret.
Right.
And I hate
we just
that.
had an episode with Rick Allen Ross recently where we talk about cult leaders.
Horrible. That's
Come join my cult. I have talked with Michael and Lisa
And
Gunger,
that's
and
why
I've
we're
joked
really
a bunch
here,
about
Jamie.
our cult that we're
calling
building.
you out on your cult.
Yes, call me out on my cult.
On your sex cult, your
you think
sex
Corey
witch
Pig
cult.
hasn't already done that multiple times over? Oh my God.
He's such a
Come
dweeb.
on.
but something you're struggling with, like of how to word.
I'm really trying to figure out, like, I mean, that's what I'm in the thick of right now. Now that this book is birthed and out in the world, I'm like, okay, my next thing up is trying to figure out how to make this, I don't want to call it a secret, but like really, or magic. I don't know what to call it. This like thing, this like beautiful knowing that I found in my relationship with my body, and like how well I can hear her, and what I know that looks like, and what I know is available to everybody. I'm trying to figure out how to distill that into something that is accessible for as many people as possible without needing to come to me directly. This is why I have a hard stop with my client work, is because I'm like, you're not gonna depend on me. Like, I'm here to show you how to depend on you, but it does take time. And so I'm trying to figure out how to, I'm literally trying to figure out how to answer that question.
That's why I saved it, because it's a really hard question to answer.
It's such a hard question. I have taught one workshop really poorly because it was my first workshop ever. Everyone was so nice. They're like, no, you did great. And I'm like, I didn't. And I just need to not do great on that because I'm learning. It's the whole vulnerability thing.
I love it. But
I am looking at like that thing I taught, that workshop that I taught about this concept and what this looks like and who took us away from ourselves and how to come back home. I'm trying to figure out how to make that into something that I can literally teach.
I love
like
that.
To be able to literally, like, you guys, like, pay a one-time fee and enroll in this course, like, and you have access to this information for the rest of your life, and it sets you up to like develop this paradigm shift that then you and your body get to like do this work, and your body becomes your teacher. Like, it is, and I acknowledge the question too, it's especially hard when you are talking about trauma, because your literal physical body will be doing things and reacting in ways that you don't have all of the information about. And you're trying to find out what it is that your body's trying to say to you. Like, what are you trying to tell me, babe? Like, what is going on right now? Because you're reacting in a way that I didn't expect. And I'm so sorry, but I just want to know what's going on. So it's like in decentering this.
And I mean, just to cut you off for 1 second, it takes a long time to get to the point where you can even acknowledge the fact that your body's reacting weird to a thing.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I noticed that too a lot with people. When I'm going through my intake form with people, there's a section on there where we're talking about like illnesses and pain in the body, and how often people are like, I forgot that I had pain because I just live with it. I'm just used to living with my pain. Yeah. So it doesn't strike me as abnormal because it's my normal. It doesn't strike me as something that maybe this is an attempt from my body who loves me to try and talk to me about something that harmed me in my past or in the present. It's just, I'm just used to waking up sore.
Yeah.
I'm used to waking up every day and having this specific imbalance or maybe like dysfunction. Like that was a big one for me, was such like the dysfunction of what was going on inside my body internally. It was like, I didn't know there was anything else. I remember when I first started like healing my body or going down the path of healing, this really vivid feeling where I was like, oh shit, is this what humans feel like? Because all I knew for my entire life, no exaggeration, was I ate food and I was in crippling pain.
Wow.
That's it. I literally thought all of you guys, everyone, part of being a human was you eat food, you're in pain.
Yeah.
I thought your body just was in pain when you were digesting.
Huh.
And then 6 years ago, my body started talking to me and was like, let's try some things. And I removed some stuff that I'd apparently been allergic to ever since I was born. Thanks, Mom. And I was like, oh, this is what you've all been doing the whole time, is just eating and feeling okay. Right. That's crazy. So
was
there
it
is
communion wafers that you were allergic
actually
to?
Technically, yes, I am allergic to the body of Christ, which is a joke and not a joke. Because they're wheat and glutinous. They're glutinous, which some progressive places are like gluten-free line, but
gluten-free.
What part of Jesus?
Legs, you could get his
thigh,
glutinous maximus too.
Oh my god!
Oh, he's a dad. It's a dad joke. It's
okay. No more life after.
No more. We're done.
We're taking away life after from you.
Your life after privileges have been revoked. No. Okay. So, but to circle all the way back around, that question is so good that I feel like It is the question. That question is how to answer that question and give that information to people in a way where they can begin to connect with themselves, love their bodies, experience the love that their bodies have for them, heal themselves. That question is what wakes me up in the morning.
Yeah.
That question is what keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
That question is what drives me to do everything I do. That question, it is the question that I feel like I will be exploring and figuring out and asking my body about how to best explain that question to people for the next few decades at least.
Cool.
And hopefully it won't take that long for me to like figure out.
I mean,
she'll
found
teach
something
me.
to die
You've
for.
got you've already given her a shot.
Right. No, but like, I mean, fair.
She will die for
I'm
it.
giving my life on behalf of the thing.
You are your
right.
own two electric boogaloo.
You are your own two electric boogaloo.
Wait,
Very
is
good.
it a number 2 or is it comma TOO? Because both of those could be fun.
I like that.
Either one,
Or
really.
We'll say 2.
So yeah, I mean, like, stay tuned, guys. Like I think
beautiful.
what's fun is that I have talked with my clients about the fact that at some point, almost every person I work with in my coaching space is like, unless someone works with you, there's no way to know what the hell it is you do. And I'm like, yeah, actually, that's true. And that's actually I see that. And it's actually one of the hardest things I'm coming up against because I'm like, this cannot be dependent on me. Like my long-term goal is to because I believe in this thing, my long-term goal is to make it as accessible to people as possible, to make it a continuing education course for therapists, coaches, counselors to, teach themselves because this needs to be bigger than me.
Yep.
It cannot be dependent on me for a lot of reasons. So that's what's hard right now is I'm like, I acknowledge that question. That question's so complicated. And I feel like I'm chipping away at that question with every person I work with every time we talk. And I'm usually talking with every person I work with for 4 or 5 or 6 months at a time. So it's a process.
Can I ask a follow-up practical question?
Yes.
So we talk a lot about being one with your body, of how fundamentalism has kind of separated, disassociated us from the identity of who we are, our actual bodies, and how our body can communicate. I've started practicing, I'm a secular humanist, and I like secular mindfulness, and so I do meditation and shit like that. But I've added it into whenever I meditate, some of the things that you've taught me into that, where I stop and I check in with my body, and I like to check in, analyze, make sure each step of me is okay and is in line, isn't okay.
Yeah.
What questions could I be asking my body at that time?
I feel like very often what centers my self-communication with my body, like the kind of guiding theme, is in one way or another checking in and asking her how safe she feels. And that can be in general, or that can be about a certain situation, a certain relationship, a certain circumstance, a certain idea, decision, whatever it might be. Because I think we've all had some sort of felt experience at some point where if I were to ask you to hey, can you conjure up in your body a memory of a time where you felt extremely unsafe? And hey, can you conjure up a memory in your body of a time when you felt extremely safe? I think we can kind of at least get adjacent to those feelings and then use that as a roadmap for in a moment in communicating with our bodies. How safe are you? How safe do you feel right now? Do you feel safe? And then building off of whatever answer you hear. Yes, no, kind of, not really. I don't want to tell you. Sometimes my body says that to me. And then I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, well, why? That everything you hear in response is information for the next thing to say. So I think, especially as it relates to healing from trauma, so people who are maybe coming from a similar context that we're all coming from, acknowledging that religious trauma is a thing, trying to reconnect with our bodies, centering the felt sense of safety is vital. And I think any conversation that you're going to have with your body to try and know your body better, or to try and communicate to your body, I love you and I know that you have only been loving me the whole time. Anytime that you can center that felt sense of safety is going to be helpful.
One favor that I've been trying to do my body is I know that I have a very active imagination, and I always have been. It goes back to my storytelling, everything, which goes to anxiety, because anxiety,
Yeah.
We've talked about this a little bit of what we don't know, our brains fill in and writes a story for it.
Yeah.
So my story is always like fucking R.L. Stein,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
or it's reflective of the really bad trauma and like going through poverty while trying to raise a kid and being disfellowshipped and losing my job and trying to pay for a divorce. All of that's when my body felt so tense and so tight and so crinkled up. But I know there's a lot of things that trigger those things that aren't true. And so I have to acknowledge that with my mind.
Yes.
And say, I'm going to stop my imagination from going through this anxiety and worry, because I know that it physically is touching my body and it's affecting my body.
Yeah.
So a favor that my brain is trying to do for my body is to be proactive and look for those things that could cause me to be more anxious and create more of these stories that are going to effectively crinkle my body back up and put it back all onto my shoulders and everywhere else I keep my pressure.
Yeah. I think you saying that too made me just think of something as well. Like, it is partially the asking and like the, are you safe? And then very often too, it's less about the asking and more of the reinforcing of like, hey, you are safe. You are safe. I know there's a story in our brain right now that is trying to tell, it's rooted in a past experience and that experience is legitimate. But right now in this moment, you and I are safe. Yeah. I am here. I am taking care of you. It is going to be okay. And then noticing how you respond to that, noticing how your literal physical, it's something in my client work often, and we're talking through sensitive stuff or talking about hard things, and I'll just leave some space and I'll be like, what are you sensing in your body right now? Tell me what you're literally feeling in your physical body right now. And that, and I mean, there's no wrong answer to that because it's just what is happening and what's coming up. But very often when we have held space and we have given permission for emotions and we have unpacked the hard stuff and maybe they've said some truth and I'm like, notice I haven't gone anywhere, like that reinforcement. Very often towards the end of a session when I'm like, hey, like check in, like what's going on with your physical body? I'll get some kind of response of like, I feel lighter, I feel safer, I feel, and it's some sort of like positive, like, upend of like, this feels better now. And it's not because there's nothing magical that happened there. It's just that space was held and they stayed with themselves and they reinforced to themselves, because that's the thing. Most of the time, I'm not even doing it. It's not me doing it. I'm asking some really good questions, but the people, they're doing it for themselves. And that's the most important thing, is that like any space you might be coming to where someone's like, hey, you need me to give you this thing in order to heal. Don't trust that person. Right. Like you can hold a container for someone to have their transformational process within for a period of time. Like we all need help to get to certain places sometimes. But the main thing, the most vital thing I'm really trying to constantly drive home is like, and we'll do that too at the end of a session. I'll be like, hey, you did that for you. Like you just showed up for you like that. All I did was ask you questions. You could have been like, I don't want to do that and hung up the phone. You showed up, like you're doing this. And anytime you get to remind someone or show someone the way in which they were just their own hero in that moment is going to remove the influence of an authoritarian religion, authoritarian parent. It's going to help them remember that here within me I have everything I need within me. It's just sometimes getting access to those things is a little bit hard.
Wow. It's so beautiful. Last night we had tornado warnings.
Oh, I know. I was here. I loved it.
My son was freaking out, and there came a point where we had to put on Captain Underpants. I put him next to me and I like held him in a way that I normally don't, a little tighter than usual, because a lot of times, like, honestly, some of my past and shit that's been thrown on me with being gay and a dad, like, has kind of ruined physical touch in some ways.
Brady.
But like last night, it was just like, fuck, my kid needs a little extra.
Yep.
Whatever,
absolutely.
And being there for him. And
you're fucking entitled to that, but
yes,
oh fuck
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But on top of that is, I needed that as a kid when I was freaking out.
Yes.
And to kind of be able to go back to that space and tell myself, it's okay to be scared because your parents are fighting and arguing. Or back to my marriage, it's okay that you're being scared because you're being gaslit and scared and that you're going to lose everything, or your career and all of that. And knowing that, because earlier, like I said, fundamentalists, we expect perfection immediately, because that's how we were taught is the only way.
Yes.
But what we're discovering is evolution, that things change over time and they adapt to the environments that we're in. And we have that ability now to...
Yeah. And shame is never going to bring about a transformational process. It will not. It's only compassion. Only compassion and self-compassion.
I want to. We're running out of time. Jamie has to go. But
I do.
I want to poke at one more thing, and I think it's somewhat relevant.
Oh boy.
How important is it to deal with your trauma?
I mean, that question is fitting anytime, but especially right now.
Especially right now.
Well, Chuck, it's pretty fucking important.
What happens if you don't deal with your trauma?
You will perpetuate it.
Trauma begets trauma?
It does. It does, Chuck. As a matter of fact, it does. And
traumatize people traumatize other people?
They do. And what's really unfortunate is that that happens in a way where people truly are convinced that the way in which they're perpetuating their trauma is what's going to heal them.
Mm-hmm.
And it is
trauma seeks to resolve itself by recreating the situation that traumatized people, where you're the one in power.
Yes.
So where the traumatized person is the one in power. So you will, I mean, take your traumatic experience, and when it's church, when it's religion, it can come out in all kinds of weird ways. Yeah. Like all kinds of weird ways. And you will, you seek to establish dominance over other people in really kind of fucked up ways. Mm-hmm. In really backwards ways. Yeah. You are literally attempting to do to somebody else what was done to you. Yeah.
Which, here's the thing about that. If we back up enough from that, this is why I can't make anyone a villain when they do that, because if I'm like, your body's a person,
it strips you of your ability to be a moral authority over other people.
100%. Because I'm like, the person of your body loves you as much as the person of my body loves me. You are trying to gain something you didn't have. Your body is doing that because your body is desperately fighting for believing in your survival and your thriving. So I see you. Like, I see what you're doing. And that is actually not the worst part about you that's doing that. That is arguably the best part about you that's doing that. It just doesn't know it doesn't have to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the whole thing too about being able to set up boundaries to that, where I'm like, I see that, and that's also not my work. Like, that's my work from me to me. And that is my work for the people that I love and the clients that I am working with. So on a large scale, I see this super clearly. And then I mute those people because otherwise my ability to see that so clearly will take over and ruin my own life, because I'm like, you can't take people somewhere they might not be ready to go. My friend Audrey was telling me something a few weeks ago, and I apologize if I super fuck this whole thing up, but there's this idea. I believe it's like a culturally like Indian idea. Maybe it's a specifically like Hindu idea, but it's literally taboo culturally. And this is like a metaphorical parallel for the deep beliefs about human nature and spirituality and enlightenment and growth. But it's literally taboo in Indian culture to wake someone up from a deep sleep. But it is equally taboo to not wake someone up when they're in a fitful sleep. That's seen as kindness. Waking someone up when they're in a deep sleep is seen as disrespect. And there's the metaphorical parallel there is you can take, it's kindness for you to take someone that they're ready, someplace that they're ready to go. It is actually deeply unkind for you to try and take someone somewhere that they might not be ready to go yet. Wow. You can't wake someone up if they're not ready to wake up. And that, I think, again, I mean, there's even more to unpack there, like the savior complex. Like, I was in missions for 10, 11 years, whatever. So of course I was given this like imperialistic colonialism, ideology of like, no, what you have, everybody needs. So I've got to be really careful to not try and impose on other people when I see them reenacting their trauma in public spaces and I see them doing to other people what was done to them and they don't see it yet. It really, it devastates me to see the fact that they don't see it yet. And also, I'm not your savior. Like, it's really ostentatious for me to even think I could be, but even the best part about me that like wants to just help, I'm like, I can't do that. Like for my own sake, but then also for yours, because maybe you're not ready to wake up yet. So I think that there are definitely some really important conversations happening right now in some public spaces about how we treat each other when we're all just doing the best that we can with what we have right now. And everyone's healing and and there's also weird hierarchies that are set up that people assume other people are leaders, but like, y'all didn't tell us. So like, we don't know that. Like, and then there's people that assume because those leaders have been assumed they must not be a leader. So they must not have been influenced. And I'm like, fuck, I remember I remember that position when I was in the church and I wasn't like the right kind of woman enough. And so I thought I had nothing of value. And I'm like, don't do that either. Like you have something of value. So I think the whole structure, like it is learning itself, like kind of people leaving evangelicalism. It is learning itself. And when I look at it, it just makes me, I'm not really mad. No, I'm not mad. I'm not mad at any individual person. I'm still so mad at the thing that indoctrinated them when they were children and adolescents for informing their subconscious that this is the way this is what it means to be a human. And I am pissed at that. And I'm not pissed at any individual person. And I also know that none of us can bring someone to a place before they're ready to get there. And that is, I mean, going back, that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. Cause I'm just like, have the words on your own time, have the thing that I did that just felt like the most important thing. I mean, honestly, I just needed to go to college and then graduate. And that's why I wrote a book is I started studying stuff that then people were like, share this with us. And then and then I did. And then they asked me to publish it. And then I did. And I just, it also though is this thing where I'm like, it's really important to me for people to have access to the information and their bodies will take care of the rest. Yeah. Like your body will assimilate this for you when you are ready, when they are ready, when your body is ready. Your body is not going to shove you into a transformational process you're not ready for. So let's say maybe you've got some other upheaval. Maybe you're going through a divorce. Maybe you are moving across the country, maybe leaving your church, your specific church environment and beginning to deconstruct your beliefs has like upended your social space, like your community, your direct community. Your body loves you so much that your body's probably going to wait. Going to wait a little bit to start unpacking the next thing with you until you're stable in that area again. And so again, even like zooming out and seeing that, I'm like, everyone's in a different spot in their process. And if we can just share our stories, podcasts live in perpetuity, books live in perpetuity, information and things we put out live in perpetuity for better or for worse. But if we can just like get that out to people, your body is your best teacher. Your body will take care of the timeline. And that has nothing to do with me.
Speaking of perpetuity,
get therapy.
Please go to therapy.
Therapy is a big thing.
Please go. I mean, like the reason that we're having this conversation right now, I mean, I know a lot of our listeners are like not aware, and I'm not going to get too into the story, but publicly, trauma was publicly manifested in a way that was really devastating for a number of people in the post-evangelical universe. And that can be prevented by just like choosing to go to therapy and choosing to talk about your experience.
But not everybody has that ability.
No,
that's true.
Like, I don't want to minimize that.
It's true.
And one thing, we try to put resources on our website.
Vote Democrat and go to therapy.
But in addition to therapy, things that we have right now are different resources that, and I'm not saying you need to replace therapy, but can at least get you the education and vocabulary through podcasts and books.
Read Wynell, read Jamie's book, read Rothschild, read
self-therapy books that you can like that are highly rated on Amazon.
Also, like
even
therapeutic spaces online too. Like there's a lot of apps and places that are existing, which is making therapy more accessible. I have a few clients. A lot of people I work with as their coach work with a therapist at the same time, which is I love. I'm not saying you have to do that to work with me, but I do love that a lot. And most of the people at this point, I've noticed the shift between 2 years ago and now, where I have more clients that are also in therapy and more clients that are able to be in therapy at the same time because they're using some sort of app-based therapeutic program. Those are great. Like, they're fucking great. They're not even like a lesser choice. They're fucking great. Yeah. All it is, you have a trained therapist that may live somewhere else that you would not be able to get to, who wants to help you and has the ability and accessibility to help you. It's just happening over a medium that is not you showing up, which also is even more accessible for people with disabilities. Like, everything about what's happening right now and being able to get therapy accessible to people, I understand that there are still some people who are financially restricted, but I feel like those walls are starting to come down a little bit more, which is great news for everyone. But don't make your Twitter friends your therapist.
And leave room for people to fuck up.
Yes.
Right.
You know, because you and I have talked about I've fucked up. You know, there was a time where I was
fuck up.
super upset at an episode of Liturgist, and I went off and had a freeze response, and not getting the response that was going to bring healing was hard. Yeah. And when people took notice, I thought that I was losing my friends again, and I started going through a whole bunch of shit, and I started to panic. Yep. And you remember that, and Chuck was there for me, and we had some bumps that we had to work out of how to be there for people, and we talked it out, and there's room for people who fuck up. There's room. There has to be room for people to have conversations and for people to come out of fundamentalism, not perfect instantly, but to have time to evolve and to learn and to hear. And there's room for you, and people need to hear that. People need to hear that. Cancel culture is not a place for people. It's a place for fundamentalism to be canceled, and it needs to go so that we can evolve and be people together.
And permission to just be human, which is the thing that we were all really harmed with in our previous religious system, was this lack of permission to just be human. So the very thing that we all need is the thing that it seems like a lot of us are resisting.
Well, we have it's difficult to unlearn.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
That it's okay to be, that it's not, it's difficult to unlearn that it is not okay to be human.
You can read my book and find out more.
Hold space for one another.
That. Check out Jamie's book.
Read my book.
What's it called?
Wow, that beer really did it for you. I'm just kidding. It is called You Are Your Own. Right? It's called. That's the funny thing about I know. Yeah. I dedicated my book to Twitter, and I'm just, in the print version, I'm just leaving it because I'm like, the irony is thick at this point. I love that. No, it's called You Are Your Own, A Reckoning with the Religious Trauma of Evangelical Christianity, which actually I have Brady to thank for that title, because I asked him for permission if I could use that, because he was using it as like a hashtag for a bit, and then it came, it popped itself into my memory, probably from seeing him use it, and I was like, are you cool? Because that's perfect.
That's just another handout we've given Jamie Finch.
I owe you guys so much money.
That's so ridiculous. That's so ridiculous.
Oh, I love you guys so much.
Jamie, thank you so much for being on the show again.
You guys are the best.
It's so much fun every time.
It is fun.
It's the best.
We get into some deep shit with Jamie.
Yeah, we do. And some silly shit. Wait till you guys hear the outtakes from this one.
Oh, yeah. You should do that.
Speaking of outtakes, if you like outtakes, you can join our Patreon.
We talk about masturbation in chat rooms.
Yep.
You're going to want to hear that.
You're going to want to hear that one.
You're going to want to hear that one.
Do you want to know what Jamie used to masturbate?
Do you guys want to know about my first experience cybering? Learn more. Give us your money and learn more. Not me, Patreon. It's them. Give them your money and learn more.
Patreon.
Just don't tell my dad.
We'll teach you how to masturbate. Anyway. Thanks everybody for listening. This has been another
episode of The Life After.
Riveting episode of The Life After. You're welcome.
Hey, Chuck, what can people do on iTunes?
They can they can rate and subscribe on
review.
iTunes and review on iTunes.
And find our online
and tell us about how we cut off Jamie in a Skype.
Oh my God.
I did feel bad earlier. Okay, I want to reckon earlier. I had a really I had an epiphany, and I said, because you said it earlier to me, and then I repeated to her, and I was like, that was very bad.
Listen to me right now, okay? If there's anything that both of you know about me as a person and as your friend, is that if I felt like you were doing that to me, you would know in 3 fucking seconds.
That's so true.
So use that as information in your corner, but you have not done that. You have not done that to me.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're good. I love you. You're okay.
Well, I'll get away with it, but I'm gay. Anyway, and you can also find our online closed group on Facebook.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Which is another thing too.
Which is actually a good place to process your trauma.
Yes, it is.
As opposed to public Twitter.
Because I view it in a lot of ways with certain posts are kind of like a group therapy thing in some ways. You know?
And I feel like in that space, you guys and other folks have done a really good job of moderating hard conversations in doing equal parts comforting and educating, because I've seen some stuff pop up where I'm like, ooh, that could be really sensitive. And then people are really gracious with one another. And I think people being gracious with one another in that space has a lot to do with there being moderators in that space.
We have great moderators.
Yeah.
Shout out to our mods.
Thank you.
Go mods.
Ladies and gentlemen.
None of this is going on the air. Or like the 4 seconds of it.